to this afternoon's information webinar on round 2 of the Scottish Government's MaaS investment fund, and this coincides with the official launch of or opening of the competition, which opened today as well. You may have seen some of the press releases or earlier information on that. I'm delighted to have with us today Laura McCaig and Juliet Bell from Transport Scotland. They're going to be presenting on giving you some information on the investment fund and talking you through some of the guidance notes, but also will be answering any questions that you may have on the upcoming fund. And I would absolutely encourage you to do just that. It's really quite an important session. It's an opportunity to get clarity on anything that you wish to do with the fund, but also an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have as well. So, just very briefly, because I'm aware there are people on the call who may not be aware of who MaaS Scotland are, or indeed who I am, so maybe I should introduce myself. I'm Ali McInroy. I'm the Chief Executive at Technology Scotland, and among other things, we run the MaaS Scotland network, which is a network of over 75 now public and private sector organisations across the MaaS supply chain in Scotland, who all, I guess, share a vision or an objective to develop and deliver mobility as a service solutions in Scotland, and we're quite proud to say that we are one of the largest networks of its kind in the world. But as well as building that network and building that visibility, which is so important, we are also facilitating projects, be that through the MaaS Investment Fund or otherwise. We see these as really important because they're going to generate the evidence base that we're going to need for the future development of mobility as a service in Scotland. You know, we have to do these things. We have to try, we have to pilot, we have to test, and we have to consolidate and bring together the data generated from these towards a kind of national approach to mobility as a service. And alongside that, we work with key stakeholders to discuss and develop what that landscape will look like. We're talking about things like policy, governance, data, regulatory, user engagement, that type of thing. And we do that predominantly through a number of special interest groups that we run. And I'll touch on those just at the end of today's session. And of course, all of that is in the hope that we can position Scotland as a global lead in mobility as a service. So in terms of our support for round 2 of the MaaS Investment Fund so far, a number of you on this call I think probably joined us for the stakeholder workshop that we ran in September, and that was very much a kind of here's what's on the way type thing for round 2. We also ran in October and November a registration of interest phase, and this was an opportunity for people to, I guess, test the water with project proposals and ideas and get direct feedback from Transport Scotland at a very early stage on that. Don't worry if you didn't participate in that. It's not a prerequisite to engaging with the fund. It was simply a tool that was there for you to get that initial feedback. But we were pleased with the level of engagement and the level of interest that was shown through that. And hopefully that is good news ahead of the fund launching formally today. I'd also like to draw your attention to our MaaS Investment Fund online hub. This is something that we accessed through our website. And we are aware that building project ideas and consortia, generally requires a bit of networking, and networking is something that is really difficult to do at the moment for obvious reasons. And events like this are very useful, but it's very difficult to build the networks required. So to try and support that, we built the MaaS Investment Fund online hub, and I would encourage you to make use of it if you're already signed up to it. If you're not already signed up to it, then please do get in touch and get yourselves involved in that. Okay, on to today's agenda, which is a very simple one. Really, I'm just about to pass you over to Laura McCaig and Juliet Bell, who will talk you through some of the important elements of the guidance around round 2 of the fund. And then immediately following that, we'll have a Q&A session where you'll have your opportunity to ask questions. And I'll talk a little bit about the logistics of that just before it, but it's your opportunity to ask any outstanding questions that you may have. And as I mentioned at the start, I would really encourage you to do that. There won't be as many opportunities perhaps, so this is a real opportunity I hope you make the most of. And then we'll hopefully all wrap up. Well, we will, I promise you, we will all wrap up by 3 o'clock. we'll not have any time creep, which has blighted so many meetings over the last 9 months. We'll try and keep it bang on to 3 o'clock. Okay, doke. So with that in mind, I will pass you now. I think Laura McCaig at Transport Scotland is going to guide you through some of the important elements of the fund. So Laura, over to you.
Great, thanks, Ali. I will just see if I can share my screen. And let's see, this is always the nervous bit when I see if this actually works. And there, so can you see my slides okay?
Yeah, looks good, Laura.
Great, thank you, Ali. Okay, so thank you very much. I'm Laura McCaig. I'm the MaaS Delivery Manager at Transport Scotland. So I'm just going to take you through the round 2 side of the fund today. So thanks to Ali and MaaS Scotland for the opportunity to speak to you today. What I'm going to cover, I'm going to do cover the following areas. I'll start with just going a wee bit over about the investment fund itself. I'll go on for what the application process is. I'll look at the criteria for evaluation that's to be covered in all applications, and then time for questions. So, the MaaS Investment Fund. So MaaS aligns with the Scottish Government strategies for a healthier, more sustainable Scotland, in that through providing better and more comprehensive travel information, introducing different travel payment methods and options and means to access public transport, more people can feel confident to use alternative ways to travel, encouraging them out of cars and so reducing carbon emissions. Our agenda for smart travel is to improve access for passengers to the extensive and varied public transport network across Scotland for all traditional modes, active travel options and future emerging mobility modes, such as connected autonomous vehicles. So our vision is that all journeys on Scotland's public transport networks can be accessed using some form of smart ticketing or payment. So thus we see MaaS as a concept that aligns with this vision. And with this in mind, in 2018, we announced we'd invest up to 2 million over 3 years in the best cutting edge, solutions driven or disruptive ideas with a view to proving the concept of MaaS within Scotland. And that fund was officially launched in 2019. So what does MaaS aim to do? Well, it aims to provide people with easy digital access to travel information so that they can be better informed about different ways to undertake their journey, and use real-time data to optimise journeys and provide customers with all the information needed to plan, book, pay and make their journey. So the aim of the MaaS Investment Fund is to test in a practical application the viability of MaaS in Scotland. And in this final round 2, there's just over £1 million left to be split across projects. Okay, so I thought it was important that I would just cover the 3 key areas that all bids must cover. And that's the deliverables, government objectives and themes. So focusing first on the deliverables, they can be categorised as including digital technologies to improve access to journey information, such as journey planning, scheduling, retailing and fulfilment methods. A single or a combination of digital technology to deliver integrated, seamless end-to-end journeys, ensuring interoperability across multiple modes of transport, using smart payment and or ticketing. And the final deliverable is using real-time data to optimise journeys and provide customers with all the information needed to plan, book, pay and make their journeys. So turning now to the government objectives. So you'll see that there is the National Performance Framework, the National Transport Strategy, and Transport Scotland's smart and integrated policy documents. And I'm just highlighting them for you to read at your leisure. I won't be going into details about them today. But I think it's important that all applications must show how you address all the following core government objectives in at least one thematic area. So first government objective is delivering the NTS priorities. So to aid recovery from the pandemic, our future transport system still needs to deliver all the NTS priorities, and they are to reduce inequalities, take climate action, deliver inclusive economic growth and improve health and well-being. And it's perhaps clearest where MaaS can support inclusive economic growth through beneficial innovation as part of the development of new products or services in a way that improves our transport system. and also provides opportunities for the supply chain to support Scotland being at the forefront of sustainable mobility. MaaS can support health and wellbeing too by encouraging people to make active travel choices to improve their health and wellbeing, improve air quality, and support local solutions. There's also the sustainable travel and investment hierarchies. Overall, MaaS can support the embedding of these hierarchies highlighted in the National Transport Strategy, because the strategy prioritises active, sustainable, public and shared transport over single occupancy car. We will prioritise public and sustainable transport, which have wider benefits, including improving health and wellbeing, as well as reducing emission from cars and other forms of transport. For the sustainable investment hierarchy, MaaS can support reducing the need to travel unsustainably, maintaining and safely using existing assets, making better use of existing capacity, and investing in targeted new infrastructure only after considering how best to use or enhance an existing capacity. Another objective that must be taken into consideration is modal shift to sustainable public transport alternatives and thus reducing carbon emissions. We also want to focus on healthier lifestyles by incorporating active travel modes. Traditional modes of transport such as bus or rail are considered active as they have an element of walking involved to access, as well as more regular active options such as bike schemes. And finally, we also want to make sure that MaaS supports digital innovation within Scotland, specifically relating to public transport. So that's the government objectives that need to be covered. I'll now go on to the thematic areas. And for round 2, there are 3 themes that we would like to include in your bids. You can either choose all of them, or if there's a particular one that's specifically relevant, that's fine. So first one is Rural Islands and the Communities theme. So in the context of the National Transport Strategy, the priority is to promote equality, and in the policy context of providing a high quality transport system that integrates Scotland and recognises our different geographic needs. We recognise that island communities and those living in remote and rural areas face many different transport issues compared to those living in less rural areas of the mainland and urbanised areas. The second theme is accessibility, tackling inequality and mobility. We have a duty to the people of Scotland to tackle inequalities and provide fair access to services we need. We also recognise that people have different capabilities, so we want our transport network to recognise these differences and work to ensure that everyone can use the system with as little effort as possible. Our transport system should not exclude people from mobility by making it unaffordable. Our third theme, which is a new one for round 2, is urban environments. And the specific focus in urban applications should be given to solutions that address traffic congestion, air and noise pollution, improving public health, transport safety, social inequality and climate emissions. As I say, there's more details of this in the guidance documents, but I'd also like to say that MaaS Scotland had held a workshop last year where we specifically focused on these themes. So I'd recommend checking out those presentations to get far more detail on each of the themes than I can possibly cover today. The next area I want to really talk about is other government policies, because these are things that we don't want MaaS to be working in isolation. So it'd be really good if your applications can also pull in the other government policies related to transport. So the first one, is low emission zones. So we have 4 cities, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen and Dundee, will be introducing low emission zones in 2022. As part of this, an LEZ support fund is available to help households in these areas. One solution of interest to MaaS is the Mobility Credit Scheme to facilitate uptake of sustainable transport options such as car clubs, active travel and public transport. Second policy I'd like to mention is smart cities. The Scottish Government is committed to working with all their cities and regions to unlock investment, whether that is through a regional growth deal or a combination of measures. This investment will help drive inclusive growth that will deliver significant and lasting economic benefits for individuals, businesses and communities across Scotland, and benefit Scotland as a whole, creating thousands of jobs and upskilling local labour markets. I don't think any presentation I can do can go by without mentioning COVID-19. And again, this is something we want to take into consideration with your bids, because we expect that any round 2 submission will have to take the impact of COVID-19 into consideration and encompass mitigations and solutions to support more sustainable and active travel, as well as addressing more traditional goals such as the missing mile. The final policy I want to mention is the 20-minute neighbourhood. Most towns and cities are adopting variations on the 20-minute neighbourhood concept, which is about living more locally by enabling people to meet most of their daily needs, such as work, education, leisure and health, within 20 minutes from home, with safe walking, cycling and local transport options, and therefore to contribute to reduced demand for unsustainable transport. The Scottish Government's place-based investment programme aims to align all place-based funding initiatives to support this concept, and it will invest 275 million over 5 years to support community-led regeneration and town centre revitalisation. And again, MaaS has a role to play here. So turning to the documentation, which has just been put on the website. So obviously we've got the guidelines, which sets out everything in more detail. But going on to the forms that you'll need to fill in, there's the application form, which covers 10% of your bid. Basically, things to note here is you can be an individual organisation, joint venture or consortium, and from either public, private or third sector organisations. But this is a place to include details of all parties if you're in a consortia and letters of agreement if applicable. We'll be looking for a business case, so that will be 70% of the markings. Things to make sure to be clear on in this is to provide clear identification of the thematic area that you've chosen. Make sure you are sure how your innovative MaaS solution or service will address this challenge, including any unique sales points and COVID-19 impact reflections. We also want to make sure that you're clear about the passenger and stakeholder demands for your solution and challenges to the delivery of the pilot project and how you will mitigate them. Planned engagement to generate behaviour change should also be included for both stakeholder and public. And we also want details of what market and behaviour evaluation has been carried out. And finally, we'll be looking for what forward planning you've got for sustainability and scalability purposes of your solution. The next form is the project plan. So again, this is just really a Gantt chart for you to include indicative milestones, start and end dates for monitoring, evaluation, marketing, etc. So that will need to be completed, and that's going to be 10% of the application form. And the final 10% is the financial plan, which consists of 3 spreadsheets. So one with the total project costs, one with match funding details, which will also include your proposed fund contribution requested, and also include your project revenue details and key cost milestones. As I say, those forms they're all now on the Transport Scotland website, so they're ready for you to download. And if anyone has any issues, please feel free to contact me. And that's the website there. So finally, just a couple of key points I want to sort of show just to sort of wrap up. So proposal key points, so all proposals must be business focused rather than pure research, and provide a MaaS solution that can be applied within the public transport realm. So we anticipate that proposals will demonstrate how innovative the project or service is relative to the challenge you're looking to address. We also want to make sure they address a commercial strategy, including risk, and demonstrate sustainable business growth or development potential and readiness for taking to market. You'll also need to demonstrate evidence-based market business research, including expected impact for the challenge areas, consideration and stakeholder engagement around planning contingency for the project environment. So for example, charging for electric modes, mobile connectivity, etc. You also need to demonstrate delivery around wider public transport integration for example, transport modes, payment, travel data information, etc. And finally, affordability and financial management for the project, including key milestones. So just to reiterate, you need to provide a project plan, demonstrate consideration for market and evaluation, be accessible, inclusive and scalable, include details of your organisation's heritage and experience, and identify benefits and risk. A few other key points to note, turning to funding mechanisms. So we propose to develop as simple an approach to funding proposals as is possible and sufficient to encourage innovation. Where a proposal is assessed as meeting eligibility criteria of the fund, we will fund on an accruals basis. So that is, funding will be released on provision of evidence of achievement of agreed milestones. Depending upon legal status of the applicants and value of secured match funding, we anticipate between 40 to 100% of funding routes. But unmatched funding proposals will only be considered in relation to third sector applications, and successful applications will only attract a maximum contribution from the fund of £20,000. Eligibility. So to meet government partnership goals, public and private collaboration is the preferred project approach. However, other, such as single, joint venture or consortium models will be considered. However, to be eligible, you must undertake your project within Scotland. You need to deliver on Scotland's wider public transport networks, that is traditional, active travel and emerging transport options. You must have a minimum viable product or solution ready for testing, trial, implementing and demonstration within the year of the funding award. You must also comply with Scottish legislation and be compatible with or working towards integration with existing Scottish public transport smart technology specifications such as ITSO. And again, all these details can be found in the guidance documentation. I also want to say, if you have a project that is in the same area as the round one project, so that's the Highlands and Islands region of Hightrans, Tactran and the Tayside area and Dundee City Council. Again, you can see on our website details of those projects. But if you're thinking about a project in that area, then please, I would recommend you get in touch with those round one project leads, because we want to make sure that any projects in this area work together rather than against each other. So again, any contact, let me know if we need to be put in contact with these people. Intellectual property is another issue that's been raised, and successful applicants are expected to agree with Transport Scotland a joint legal and binding contract before receiving award funding, including agreement of intellectual property ownership. This documentation will seek to accurately reflect the level of the current solution and service status, and will set out an agreed position as to the future ownerships for all parties. So this agreement will be jointly developed if the application is successful for competition funding. But I think what I need to be clear is that this is what is developed as part of the project. It's not your already existing technology. Procurement is another thing that's been raised, and we understand that there's limitations that some organisations are under, and we will judge applications on the strength of each individual application. So we anticipate that some procurements will need to be tendered following application, and as such, applications should highlight what the intended tender outcome will provide and the relevant dates and costs, etc., within the project and financial plans. So finally, just going on to the timeline of what we're working with. So as we say, we had the stakeholder consultation events last year, and as Ali mentioned, the pre-registration period, which just finished in December. All comments that people who submitted applications for the pre-registering period should have contacted you with your comments. If you haven't heard anything yet, please get in contact with me and I will let you know. But so this is the official launch of round 2 today. The competition will close on the 26th of February this year. And after that, we're hoping to make awards at the end of April, with the round 2 projects aiming to start in June, so about 8 to 10 weeks after award. So thank you very much for listening to me today. As I say, Juliet and I are here to answer your questions, but if you don't want to answer a question today, please contact me at the email address there. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. That's brilliant. And just to support that, you'll notice in the chat, you may have seen that I've put a link to the guidance notes for round 2 within that. So if you haven't already had a quick scan or a good read through them, then obviously I thoroughly recommend that you do that. And I would say as part of that, there's also very extensive FAQs within that guidance. So I suspect many questions that you may have may be answered through that. However, this is now a chance to ask any immediate questions of Juliet and Laura. So obviously there are a number of you on the call. So how we're going to do this, if you could either type your question into the chat functionality, which hopefully you're all reasonably familiar with now, after having done it for the last 9 months or so. If you would prefer to ask your question, that is fine. Just put your name into the chat and I'll come to you and ask you to unmute yourself and ask the question directly to Juliet and Laura. And where there are gaps, I will fill with my own questions using chair's prerogative, I guess, in order to do that. But I'd much prefer to have questions from those of you at home or wherever you are, I guess, offices, etc. Okay, so there's a few coming in, so I need to do well. So the first one's a really easy one. Will this recording be available later? Yes, it will. You'll get that as attendees. You'll get a post-event email, and there'll be links to the recording within that. It'll also go up on the MaaS Scotland website. Okay, so our first question is from Peter McBride from Scintilla. It gives me an opportunity to thank Scintilla for their sponsorship of Technology Scotland as well. Thanks, Peter. And he's got a question on intellectual property. So he says the projects must have a benefit for Scotland, but is there the ability for companies to own or have exclusive commercial rights outside of Scotland? So if the project...
Okay, hello, it's Juliet here. Hi, thanks, Peter. The intellectual property arrangements, the standard case is that the Scottish Government has the intellectual property arrangements of the actual pilot itself. We imagine that the technology is already owned by the company, so unless there's actually specific developments that the MaaS fund is paying for, then the intellectual property for the actual technological platform remains with the company. But each consortium, group, bid, applicant are being successful on award. There is a conversation that can be had with ourselves around that. It's not set in stone. We're working. We appreciate everybody's trying to get something out with this, and it's got to be commercially sustainable as well.
Okay, thanks, Juliet, and thanks, Peter, for your question as well. Our next question comes from Rubina Barton up in Shetland. And she asked the question, what does or indeed doesn't count as eligible funding, for example, other TS funding routes, and I guess perhaps other public sector funds as well. So are there any limitations on what can be used for match funding?
No, we have purposely kept this clean. It's not ERDF supported. It's entirely Scottish Government funding. Therefore, it can be matched by other Scottish Government funds. However, what I would say is that you would need to check the other Scottish Government funds that you're matching it with, that they can also be matched by this fund. So we are not discounting anybody else's fund stream, but to check that their fund stream doesn't discount ours, if that makes sense to you. That's not very clear, is it? But hopefully people understood what I meant.
They'll soon tell us if it wasn't clear. Keep an eye in the chat. Not Rubina, it's perfectly clear to Rubina.
Oh, thanks, Rubina.
Thanks to both of you. I guess sort of related to that, just to wait for other questions to come in around that match funding piece. What evidence do you guys require at the point of application that match funding is in place?
I'll take that one as well, unless Laura's got anything to add to it. She's stuck on mute by the looks of it. So it was just to say, so in terms of we just expect to see that you have been awarded match funding elsewhere, and just when you're putting through your documentation, you would add in documentation that indicated that, whether it's a letter or an email or whatever it is that you've received from that, just to prove, it's just proof of evidence. We are audited obviously with Scottish Government, so we do need to have copies of these kind of documentation for that purpose. Laura, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that one. It looks like you've managed to unmute.
Yeah, no, eventually. No, I think that's fine. Yeah, you've covered everything, Juliet.
Okay.
Thank you. And sticking on the theme of funding, Louise is asking, is in-kind funding, is in-kind match funding eligible? This has been asked a few times.
No, I know that.
Laura, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we've had issues before with in-kind, and it's definitely not eligible. I think we just would need to have the details so that we'd be able to analyse what exactly you mean by in-kind match funding, Louise. But as I say, in-kind is not eligible at all.
I think if you've got a specific thought in mind, Louise, the best thing to do is to email the MaaS email address that Laura put up, and we can have a discussion with you around it. I think it's very difficult, like I said, because we're audited, we have to be very clear on what we are and aren't funding through the MaaS fund. And each case is quite difficult because in-kind means different things to different people, as Laura mentioned there.
Yeah, as we're saying, it's very difficult to compare against projects, so that's why we like that things have to be upfront. So like staff costs are eligible now, but again, we would have it's up to a reasonable cost limit. So again, the more details you can give us on that, we'll be able to analyse it and get back to you.
Yeah, thanks guys. That's a question that's come up a number of times. So I guess I would just encourage everyone on the call that if you're in any doubt, as Laura and Juliet says, just get in touch with them and find out. We don't want to be, it's not up to me, but I guess we don't want to be ruling anything out without hearing some of the details. So please do get in touch with them and ask those questions. Okay, so the next question is from Juliet Sestran. Apologies, I'm reading this out pretty much directly. Could you elaborate on the requirement for a commercial strategy and demonstration of financial viability of the project? I'm thinking that MaaS projects in a rural context may not be commercially viable, financially self-sufficient, but rather help optimize supported services, etc. So how will you guys, I guess, there's a balance to be struck there, right? Not all projects can be viewed the same way, as Julie rightly points out. So how will that be, I guess, built into the criteria for evaluating these projects?
So I'm waiting for Juliet to speak that.
That's a good one. The thing is, I think that we do realise and we do appreciate that, especially rural transport is very difficult to show commercial sustainability on. I think that what we're looking for is that the project, the pilot itself will show whether or not there is an appetite for it, and whether or not that then becomes more sustainable in terms of different ways that you can approach it. And this is where the innovation, I guess, aspect comes in. So whether it's using DRT to supplement services, whether it's using a different way of booking, this kind of stuff. I think that that's what we're looking for. We do appreciate that running rural services is not commercially sustainable in the long run. But certainly I think that what we're trying to do is to see, well, actually what can be done that's perhaps a bit different that could then support these rural areas with better transport, information links, ways to pay, ways to book, this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think to say the fact it is a competitive fund and we're looking to see what of those themes we can get projects on. So Julia would say it just really depends what your project does, that we'll be able to analyse it and compare it to others. So not necessarily being such a strong commercially viable doesn't necessarily mean that we wouldn't be able to take it forward in some form.
Okay, thank you both.
And certainly that's the last round. Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, certainly the last round we did just look at rural. We didn't have the sort of urban area, which we think is a probably more commercially sustainable area. However, even with the impact of COVID again, who knows? So it's all a bit up in the air. So yeah, I think that's probably about as much we can cover on the rural side of it.
Okay, perfect, thank you. And thanks to Julie for the question. Our next question comes from Aaron. Is there a minimum amount that has to be shown as match funding?
No, I don't think there is a minimum amount.
I would just be noting that obviously, again, it's a competitive fund, like Laura said. So if you come with a strong match funding amount, it shows that it's been thought out, that there's more investment in it, and it's, you know, it's something that we're looking at as well. It's part of the competitive fund process.
Okay, so 1% match funding is unlikely to win in such a process, you would gather from that.
Not unless you've got the most amazing idea in the whole entire universe.
Yeah, enough. And our next question is from Alan, and he asked, does TS have a preferred legal form for a consortium application? And so he gives the examples, contractor, subcontractor, partnership agreement, etc. Do you guys have any views on that or preferences?
No, I would say that we've heard different ones from the previous, from the previous applicants and the previous award. What I would say is that we're just looking for you to have those set up and in place, and those are agreements and arrangements between yourself and the other partners in there. And how you set that up is up to you, but as long as you're sure that everybody's content and it's going to work as you take it forward.
Okay. Okay, and our next question, hang on, so jumping a little bit. So our next question, is there a maximum timeline allowed for the proposed project in terms of time, milestone and delivery?
So we're looking at a 12-month project here. So basically that's the maximum we'd allow, and then 2 months project write-up. So basically 14 months from project starting is the maximum.
Okay, and just because this was go, Julia.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to add on that one. Because of COVID, obviously there's an impact, and we do appreciate that there's an impact already on the current projects that are there. So we had 3 that were awarded, of which 2 was delayed. Well, 3 of them are delayed. 2 of them looking to start. I think, Laura, you'll keep me right. And is it early next year or this year even?
This year, yeah. So we're looking at kind of March, May, June-ish for the new project, for the round 1 ones.
And I think obviously the second lockdown again has had another impact, and we are mindful of that, and we're aware that it means that people can't necessarily progress in the way that they wanted to originally, but we still want this fund to be ready to go when it can.
And I guess in that, because from memory from round 1, there was around, from the point of award, there was maybe a 2 or 3 month kind of milestone, if you like, of getting the project actually started and out. And I presume again you're going to be as soon as possible, but again we'll be flexible depending on the current circumstance, much like we are for round 1.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah, pretty much the same, Ali, you're right. It's a 2 or 3 months, I think. We're expecting that partnerships that have been set up and had, you know, been formulated and then were actually agreed, it was people needed to actually then get the people in place and stuff, because at the time when you put your application in, you don't know if it's going to succeed. So we do appreciate that there's a built-in time period that people need to have before the project actually kicks off. So I think it was 2 to 3 months after the award that we were looking for the project to start in earnest.
I think that's worth pointing out to people who are maybe thinking about a round 2 project, that the degree of flexibility that you guys have shown around round 1, just in case that is of a concern to them. And I know that those project leads for round 1 have been grateful for that degree of flexibility and understanding around that. So I guess worth highlighting that, just if there's anybody out there who is perhaps hesitant to engage with this because they're a bit concerned about what COVID might mean and what that might mean for deliverables, etc., that there has been a degree of flexibility shown in the past. Any more questions coming through at the moment? I've been asked a few times, this is actually one of your FAQs, but I'll bring it up anyway. Before the application, do all the project partners need to be agreed and signed up before the application is made? Or is there any flexibility perhaps around some of the I don't know, minor's not the right word for them, but the smaller partners within that beyond it, or will you be looking for a full project consortia at the point of application?
So I think from my perspective, and Laura may have a slightly different one, but my perspective is that as long as you've had the discussions and that people are aware of what you're planning on doing with the various bodies that are within the area that you're having those having your pilot, and that you've got those at least an email that notifies that you've been having those discussions, even if it's not agreed, just that they're supportive. I think the stronger application will have those agreements in place, but we will take obviously emails that say, yeah, we're interested in this, we'd like to do it, and showing willing. The other thing I think just to be mindful of as well, Ali, in these situations is that there are obviously the pilots already looking to go underway, hopefully in spring, summer this year. And if you're building on or making a pilot in those areas again, that you've had discussions with the pilots that are already there to make sure that there's nothing that's going to compete, because we obviously don't want the MaaS fund competing with the MaaS fund. It doesn't make any sense at all.
No, I was glad that Laura brought that up in her presentation, because it's one of the most asked questions we have actually, is if you're looking to do something in a similar geographic area, are you immediately precluded? And so it was good that that was clarified up front. And just on that, if you're unsure, or if you're not necessarily connected to those who are running projects in an area that you're thinking of trialling, then either through Transport Scotland or ourselves at MaaS Scotland, get in touch and we'll make the necessary contacts and ensure that you're having the right conversations around that. We have another question. Oh, it's from Julie again. It says, Jan, so do you have any expectations or requirements around joining up concessionary travel and MaaS projects?
I'm definitely letting Juliet answer this one, because that's her bag. Sorry, Juliet.
So obviously the concessionary scheme, Julie, the concessionary scheme runs on the ITSO technology, and we are aware that the ITSO technology at the moment is not necessarily on a digital platform per se, such as a mobile platform that's accessible for everybody just now. I think it's available on Android phones, for example, but not yet on Apple phones. So we're aware that there's some issues and some concerns around that one. What I would like is to see people at least trying to address that and joining up those concessionary travel journeys, because I think especially in rural areas, like you've mentioned before, these are going to be key. It's concessionary services that are run, quite often there are lifeline services that are run in these areas. So we would like to see it, but I do appreciate that it's not necessarily an easy thing to do. But the current pilots that are there at the moment, they're looking at it and how it can be done. And they're certainly attempting to do that. I'm more than happy if anybody from the current pilots that's on can have a chat around what they're doing with that as well. That'd be really interesting for these guys. Or Julie, if you want to have a chat with them, I'm sure they would let you know what they're doing.
I'm going to ask I'm going to ask a kind of. Oh, sorry, Julie. Do you want to?
I just wanted to comment on that. That's much appreciated, Juliet. Thanks a lot. Do you mean just the other the round one projects? Talking to them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I'm pretty sure I saw.
Get in touch with them. I was going to say.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure David from Enable was on. I saw his name pop up, so I don't know if David's here to have a chat around what they're doing, or if he can have an offline chat with you, Julie, around what they're doing. If they're doing what they're doing in Hightrans, Ranald, or my release from Hightrans as well, I'm sure we'll be able to let you know what they're doing for their ITSO considerations as well.
Yeah, that would be fine.
Again, Julie, you probably know our colleague Stephen York, and you can have a chat with him too. I'm sure he'll be able to help you out with it one as well.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, guys. I've got quite a basic one, but again, it's one that we get asked quite a lot, and I appreciate there might not be an easy answer to this, but might give people a rough idea. How many awards do you guys roughly expect to be making for this round two? Now, I know that will be very much dependent on what comes your way, but do you have any feel at all for where you would preference may be?
I think given from previously, as I say, we've just got just over £1 million left, so we kind of there's no point in having like numerous hundreds projects of £10. So I think ideally we're looking between 2 and 3 projects. Again, it just depends on the strength of what the applications that we're getting in. So it might be more, it might be slightly less, but I'd say 2 to 3.
I think it's a bit different. Yeah, it's a bit different, Ali, this time with having the urban one. I think that we might find that there's a slightly different bodies looking at the actual fund itself this time than the previous one. So yeah, no, interested to see what happens and what comes forward.
Okay, no, thanks for that. But just in case people are doing the maths at home, I guess it is worth also pointing out that smaller projects, particularly those being led by third sector organisations, are available as well. You might notice there's a £20,000 unmatched, or sorry, no need for match funding for those organisations as well. So there are opportunities for projects from small to large, as there was in round one. We've got no more questions coming through directly at the moment. Another question that's come up a few times is around the revenue funding part of this. And I guess is very simply how that is defined, but also what the relationship is between that and match funding. Maybe you could spend just a couple of minutes kind of defining the two and where the differences lie, and what impact that would have on the I guess on the financial modelling that the proposers will be pulling together.
Laura,
yeah, I love the finance questions. So
a lot of this is in the FAQ document. Yeah. So I mean, I think that if people have a look through that and they've still got questions at the end of it, I'm more than happy. I mean, revenue for me is something that's making money through the actual service itself. So revenue is something, I don't know if you've got advertising on your MaaS platform, for example, and that's generating revenue. Sorry, what was the second part of that, Ali? You said there was a revenue, and then the other type of funding was?
It was
match
just
funding, did you say?
Yeah, it was just to say what the relationship was, if anything between them, or not the relationship, but how they're defined in the context of your own financial proposals, because obviously each has an impact on the amount of funding that you will receive, I guess, ultimately from Transport Scotland.
Okay. So I think that for me, revenue is something that's actually made. So when you're running the pilot, if you're doing advertising around the edges of that, for example, and you're making money from that, or if you're charging a transaction fee when the people are making payments and you're making money from that, so that would be the revenue that they're making, which could perhaps build up to it being the commercially sustainable piece that we were talking about earlier. The part about the match funding is that other people that are putting money into this, other bodies that are putting money into this, whether it's a private company or whether it's another pot of money that's available from a local authority or a different growth fund, Scottish Government growth fund, something like that. And those would be what your match funding streams, and they would be counting towards, I think, looking at the pilot overall. But like I said, because we're not vetting the other match funding streams that are coming in, the organisations themselves will need to be aware of the rules and regulations that sit on those sides.
Okay. And just
hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, of course. Just a final question from me on the evaluation side, because I guess it's always useful for people to have some understanding of how the proposals will be evaluated and who indeed will be evaluating them. So maybe just spend, I don't know, a minute or so just explaining how applicants will be chosen and who will be involved in that process.
Sure. So the evaluation process, basically we have the MaaS Investment Fund Working Group, which has been set up for the investment fund with members from across Scottish Transport, Ali, yourself as a member, and other transport professionals. And basically we're meeting on a monthly basis to go through the various issues relating to the fund. So I'm hoping all the working group members will be on the evaluation panel. We'll also invite some other transport professionals with specific interests. So those, the themes that we were talking about earlier, so whether they're accessibility issues or whether there's rural issues, so we would have somebody from each of those themes also on the panel. So and at the next working group we will be discussing the evaluation plans, just so that everybody's aware of what's required. So I think that's, it's, you know, there's quite good plans in place for how we are going to evaluate this. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else I can add at the moment, Ali.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Okay. And just for clarity as well, although I do sit on the working group and MaaS Scotland's on the working group, will not be part of the evaluation panel. We'll maintain our neutrality there for our members by removing ourselves from that bit of it. Okay, we've probably got time for one more question. Apologies if I've missed anything as I've come through here, but It's from Andrew Ferguson. Well, I may have missed one actually, maybe come back to that. Andrew Ferguson, could you talk a little bit, please, about the multi and multimodal? Our project has elements of DRT, but there is interest from ScotRail, and we'll also, for example, be involved in bike hire. Is there any advice you can give on the number and types of modes that you envisage? So is there a definition of multimodal, or is it just more than one?
I'd say it's really hard to define because it really depends on what the projects are. You know, I don't think we could say like, oh, that definitely has to be X, Y, and Z modes, because, you know, you'll see with the projects we've got in round one, there's a variety of modes and they're trying to get even more on. So I'd say the more modes you can get, the better the MaaS solution is going to be. But, you know, it really does depend on what your solution is. So it's kind of hard to say.
There's a little bit in there as well about, sorry, Laura, there's a little bit in there as well about the concept of MaaS and the missing mile. So it's something that also does help to address that. So if your missing mile is within the city centre, but you're thinking, right, well, okay, we can add in a shared mode of transport with a car club or with an active mode with a bike hire scheme, then yeah, that's great. So I think it's just, like Laura said, it's looking at your actual pilot itself and what you need to bring to that to make it as most sufficient as you can.
Okay, well, thank you, guys. I'm conscious of time. We're now approaching the last 5 minutes. Appreciate that we've only managed to get through just a few questions in that time. But as Juliet pointed out, there are a number of these questions and others are answered through, as I mentioned before, quite an expansive FAQs as part of the guidance documentation. So please do get in touch. Please do read that and the questions involved. Of course, get in touch with ourselves or Transport Scotland as well if there are any questions that you may have directly related to this or to the fund in general. I'd just like to reiterate the online hub as well as a networking tool for you all. And I mentioned this at the start because we're conscious that there's the MaaS Investment Fund, which is very much focused on the doing and the piloting and the data generation around mobility as a service, but alongside that we run a series of special interest groups looking at some of those enablers, if you like, for mobility as a service and what else we need to be concerning ourselves with as we look to upscale MaaS across Scotland. So the next one of those is actually on Wednesday. That session is actually oversubscribed, so there are no spaces left on that one. There are a few spaces left on our session on evaluation frameworks on the 20th of January. And then we're running what is actually the second meeting in the series. So these all run as a number of meetings. The next one of our data and security will be the 10th of February and user and stakeholder engagement on the 17th of February. More information on all these on our website, so please do check that out. And if you're interested, then do sign up. The February events aren't quite ready for sign up yet, but they will be very, very soon. And I should also point out that these events do tend to be oversubscribed and we do prioritise MaaS Scotland members in terms of access. So that is a kind of roundabout way of pitching MaaS Scotland to you. If you're not already a member, then please do join and make sure you get access and get your thoughts registered through all these special interest groups. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you very much all for taking the time to I was going to say come along, but not at all, to tune in to today's session. I hope that you found it useful. I suspect that there will still be many questions out there that haven't been answered. So as I say, do get in touch with ourselves or Juliet and Laura, and we'll all do our very best to try and help. Everybody here wants to make these projects in this round two and indeed the projects from round one as successful as possible. So let's try and do that together.